Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In this Congress, a consistent theme of the committee's work has been to ensure U.S. competitiveness in science technology, including our nation's commercial space activities. This is particularly important as we examine space policy and consider how to continue leadership from the U.S. commercial space sector. To this end, we have considered the role of commercial entities play in the future of space exploration and how collaboration between government and industry can both further national space objectives and support the development of a space economy. Importantly, we've also considered how the federal government can authorize and supervise the activities of non-governmental entities without limiting innovation and technological achievements. In 2018, the Trump administration's Space Policy Directive No. 2, commonly known as SPD-2, triggered a government-wide review of the administrative framework applicable to space activities. SPD-2 directed agencies to streamline licensing processes and otherwise reduce the burden of regulatory compliance for space operators. 5 years have passed, and it's time to assess the effectiveness of these reform efforts. Today's hearing will review the licensing process for launch and reentry vehicles administered by the Department of Transportation via the Federal Aviation Administration. In 2020, FAA issued the Streamlining Launch and Reentry License Requirements Final Rule. This sought to establish a single licensing process that applied to all types of launch and reentry operations by replacing the existing prescriptive requirements with performance-based criteria. Now, 3 years since the rule went into effect, we seek to understand the impact of the new licensing process and the extent to which it accomplished the goals of SPD-2. We will consider progress in implementing the rule and identify areas which may benefit from further improvement. Beyond our review of the launch licensing, we also consider the approach behind the United States regulation of space activities of all kinds. How did the existing structures evolve over time? What lessons can be learned as we look to grant new authority over in-space activities? How have past efforts affected the pace of innovation? How do we continue to encourage commercial space activity moving forward? Last fall, this committee addressed many of these issues in the Commercial Space Act, sponsored by Chairman Babin. This legislation provided regulatory certainty to the American commercial space sector while streamlining the licensing process for launch and reentry. The morning that we marked that legislation up, the National Space Council unveiled, did I say the morning that we marked that legislation up? The National Space Council unveiled a legislative proposal for mission authorization that, while well-intended, created more burdens for our commercial space industry. This proposal would require commercial operators to go through a maze of regulatory agencies before launch and creates a confusing process even for the most seasoned regulatory experts. This is why we must advance the Commercial Space Act and not wait for another Congress to act. I hope my colleagues will join me in moving forward this important legislation. And I thank our witnesses for joining us today. Each of our panelists bring a different perspective on these issues, and I look forward to hearing their thoughts. And with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.